I mentioned are serving on the board for the SoulPhone, and I think it's getting close to being ready to being released. Am I correct in understanding that?
The technology is pretty much there. I was the vice president for the SoulPhone Foundation. The SoulPhone project's still ongoing. So we do know that people in spirit can communicate electronically. It's been going on since we've had electronics, through radio, through television, now through cell phones. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of things with that. The SoulPhone is Dr. Gary Schwartz, who was with the University of Arizona when he started this, thought, let's build a device that's not dependent on mediums and that's not dependent on the operator that will work kind of like a cell phone does. You can just pick it up and dial it. What he started doing is working on basically binary things at first. Can we get yes, no answers? And we've got several different technologies that get pretty reliable yes, no answers. And the thing is getting that time frame short enough so that you can then turn that into what we call a keyboard, and then you could start doing texting. The next step would be audio. The next step would be video. We can ask people in spirit yes, no answers, but we want to get to the point where we can do something that's more practical.
My guest today is Brian D. Smith, who 30 years ago was terrified of dying, and he began studying near-death experiences. And if you're on this channel, you understand what a rabbit hole that leads to. And as a result, Brian has been on this incredible spiritual journey where he is now serving on the different boards of IANDS, of helping parents heal, and also of a SoulPhone. So we're going to have an interesting conversation about what we feel like we've learned from near-death experiences. So you're not going to want to miss all that Brian is going to share today. So Brian, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Lori. Look, I'm excited to have this conversation.
This is going to be a great conversation. I think that it's probably best to start this conversation at the beginning for you, because I said in your intro that 30 years ago, you were terrified of dying. And I think that dying is number one, number two, most feared on the planet. And so I would imagine the majority of people watching today, if it's not a big fear, it might be a little fear. And so will you share your journey of that and how that brought you to where, we're sitting here having this conversation today about death?
Absolutely. But I have to correct you a little bit. It was actually a lot more. I'm probably older than I look. This goes back like 40, 50 years ago.
I
But
love that you're correcting me on that. That's
yeah, so my
wonderful.
fear of death goes back. It was several years before my daughter passed, which we'll get to. But I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian home. I was taught about heaven and hell and God, was going to judge us and all that stuff. And it put the fear of God into me. So from the time I was even a young child, I had this fear of death. When I was in my 20s and 30s, it kind of peaked. And that's when I went to get counseling, and I started just diving deep into the afterlife. What is this all about? What does science tell us? What does other religions tell us? What does philosophy tell us? I really needed to know. So I started studying everything I could at the time about mediumship, near-death experiences, after-death communications, etc. And then I gotten pretty comfortable with knowing what I thought happened when we died. And then 10 years ago, my 15-year-old daughter, Shaina, passed suddenly. So as I said, she was 15 years old. This was June 24th of 2015. And so when Shaina passed, went from like something I kind of wanted to know to something now I need to know. If you're a parent and you've lost a child, you want to know, where is my child? Other people can pass, your grandparents, whatever, and you're just kind of okay with that. And even that little fear, or that fear that I had about where I was going to go, that was driving me. But now I needed to know, where is Shaina? So at that point, that's when I started doing this like full time. I sold my company, and I started, I got my life coaching certification. I got certified as a certified grief educator, and I started. I joined Helping Parents Heal and IANDS and other organizations. And so this is what my passion is now: is to help other people to alleviate that fear of death, because I believe we fear what we don't know, and the more you know about death, the less you're going to fear it.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss of Shaina. She's pictured behind you. We invited her to be a part of our conversation and to help guide us today. I love the organization Helping Parents Heal. Elizabeth Boyson lives in the town that I live in. I had the
Yeah.
pleasure of meeting with her and interviewing her, where she shared the death of her son. And it's such an inclusive organization. And I know it's helped so many people. And I haven't lost a child, but your story really rang true with mine, because I too was on this spiritual journey for a number of years since my 30s. When I hit 30, I all of a sudden decided I believe God existed. I really didn't know. I was agnostic about it before that. And I started searching in Edgar Cayce and reading Brian Weiss and past lives and all these things. And then in 2012, I lost a very significant soulmate, and it wrecked me. And even though I believed in all of these things, like you said the exact same words I say. I began searching for him in the afterlife. I was
Yeah.
reading every medium book I could get my hands on, and just incredibly deep dive into this. I didn't sell a business and get out of the corporate the way that you did. So I think it's just an amazing path to be on. And I feel like sometimes these things are designed because we're supposed to be of service and in a certain way to be able to do that. And so now, knowing what you know, it's been 10 years since you lost Shaina. Do you feel that it was part of your path?
I do. And it's really wild because a few months after Shayna passed, I had a reading with the medium. Her name is Suzanne Wilson, and she's fabulous. And Suzanne was the first one that introduced me to this concept. She said, Shayna is saying that this had to happen. And I was like taken aback. And, Suzanne even said, I'm glad I'm not in the room with you because you'd probably, punch me in the face or something. But since then, I've come to understand, I believe that most of the things, if not all the things in our lives, are planned. And I have little hints from Shayna. When she was young, she said she didn't want to grow up. She would say things
Wow.
like, I remember when she was like 10, she started crying. She said, she said, I don't want to get boobs. I don't want to have a period, because she has a sister that's 3 years older. Shana said, I always want to like live at home. And she said she saw the Phoenix University commercials on TV. She said, I want to go to school in my pajamas. So I called her my little Peter Pan. So I think Shayna's plan was to come here, have a great time for 15 years, be the baby of the family, and then go home.
And then be the accelerator for your journey to reach out and serve and help so many people,
Yeah.
Brian, which is
Yeah.
just so beautiful.
Yeah, it's pretty funny too, because when we had our business, we sold hair care products, and we were featured in Ebony magazine at one point because we sold African American products. And my wife would tease Shane, she said, You're going to be famous. You're going to be famous one day." And Shayna would like kind of push back on it. And now Shayna is fairly famous. I mean, she's been on stage with medium Suzanne Giesman's used her in presentations. She's featured in my podcast. Everybody in Helping Parents Heal knows Shayna. So yeah, a lot of people know who she is now.
Amazing. So I'd like to go back, because you said that maybe 40 or 50 years ago, you were afraid of death, and then you found near-death experience stories. Do you remember the first near-death experience story you heard that really knocked your socks off?
Well, I don't recall anyone in particular before Shayna passed. And then I remember after Shayna passed, it was Dr. Mary Neal.
Oh,
And
sure.
and I've seen, since I've met her and I've seen her speak a couple of times. But the thing that really touched me about her experience as a parent who's lost a child is she had, and I won't recount the whole thing, but she had gone into heaven. She had met Jesus. She saw how everything works out to the 35th degree and everything. But she was told her son was going to pass away early. And she had about 10 years between that time and the time her son passed. And when he did, she mourned. And I remember her saying that, like, she still had the grief. And the reason why it struck me so deeply was like, if she can grieve, then it's okay for me to grieve. Because this woman knew, she had been there. She knew it was going to happen even. So everybody, no matter what we know about all these things, we still have to go through the grief process. And that's the one that really stands out to me when I think about, and I was so glad that she stood up there and said that I still had to grieve.
Wow. Powerful. So why don't you name or talk about another one that really, really influenced you?
Well, one is actually she's become pretty well known now. Her name is Penny Whitbrot, and
I have not heard of her.
She had several near-death experiences. She was a nurse, and she had this really weird autoimmune thing that would just cause her to go into anaphylactic shock, and so she actually passed away several times. And I had her on my podcast, and Penny is a devout Christian, so the near-death experiences I think kind of freaked her out a little bit at the time, and I haven't been in contact with Penny for a little while now, but I know her husband was, and they were both very, very devout, so they were a little bit like shy about sharing this. But it was the fact that she had gone back and forth so many times, and it was one of those veridical ones. And I remember she was telling part of the story was she's in the hospital, she's on the machines. They call her sister up and they tell her sister, "Your sister's dying." So her sister gets in the car to drive to the airport to fly to the hospital. Penny finds herself in the back seat of the car, and it's pouring down, raining. She looks at what her sister's wearing. She goes, "Why is she wearing these crazy clothes? They don't match." So her sister gets to the hospital. Penny comes too, and Penny goes, "Why were you wearing those crazy clothes? And why were you driving in the rain?" So it was one of the first veridical ones that I had heard about where she was like, she was actually there in a different location in a different state as she was lying in the hospital bed.
And what I remember this, wasn't it because she had been called out of bed in the middle of the night, dressed as quickly as she could to get in the car to get to the hospital,
Yeah,
which was
yeah,
again evidential information, which
yeah.
then confirms that somebody's not making this up, dreaming, seeing what they want to see, etc.
Yeah, so the vertical ones, I love the vertical ones. I don't need vertical evidence in all of them now, but it's nice to have those because those kind of anchor it. So if people don't have vertical evidence, I still believe them, of course. But those are the ones that we can say to the materialist, okay, explain this. Explain how
Right.
this person knows this.
Exactly. Okay. So, what is it, do you think, Brian, about the near death experiences that helped you to be comfortable with the dying process?
Well, the thing about near-death experiences, there are all kinds of evidence. I tell people, it's like the near-death experiences is a big, big body of evidence. But Ken Ring calls studying near-death experiences the benign virus, because when people have these experiences, they come back and they're changed. They have a different point of view on life. They have a different point of view on what's important, what's not important, et cetera, et cetera. And we can get that same effect by studying enough NDE experiences. So that's my favorite body of evidence to study, I would say. The thing is about it is it's so comforting. Almost everything you hear about near death experiences is comforting. And I was talking to a client just yesterday, and she was talking about her husband who had passed away, and she's like, he's gone or something like that. I said, no, he's not gone. And I said, death is not final. And she was like, what do you mean? I said, death is not final. And I was telling her about, I just heard one the other day, Elizabeth Crone, who had this near death experience. She was struck by lightning, and she finds herself outside of her body. And what's interesting, sometimes people when they quote die, they don't know they're dead. So she walks into the synagogue with her two sons who are with her in the parking lot, and this guy comes running up, and the kids are screaming, and she's looking at the guy, and she said, "I don't know why this guy was ignoring me. It was because he couldn't see her. Her body was in the parking lot." So that's, to me, it's very comforting because that transition, they say it's just like waking up. It's like waking up from a dream.
Absolutely. It's and the other thing I think is so fascinating about near death experiences is how often people come back and say, "This is the fake experience. That's the
Yeah,
real experience." It's kind of the difference in The Wizard of Oz, where you're in the black and white, and then you're in Technicolor, you know, place where everything is just so much, so hyper real, hyper colored, hyper intense.
yeah, exactly. And the other thing about it, I guess, for me, again, having that intense fear of death is that almost universally, anyone who's had a near death experience does not, they say, I don't fear death. They'll say, I don't want to go through the dying process. I don't like pain, but I don't fear death. And what's really interesting to me is even the people who have what we call negative near death experiences still report that they don't fear death. They figure that they were sent back for a reason. They get a kind of a chance to do it again, and they don't expect to go through that same negative experience again. So the elimination of the fear of death. So I think, well, if people who have died don't fear death, then why should the rest of us?
Right. Absolutely. I think that you are right. I'm trying to think of anybody that I've interviewed that has ever said that they're still afraid of dying. I cannot think of a single person. I've interviewed probably close to 350 people now who have had these
Hmm.
NDEs.
Yeah, all the ones that I've looked at, that I haven't heard of anybody, and I've even interviewed people who have had again what they call negative near-death
Me too.
experiences, and they still don't fear it.
Yeah, it's incredible. What part about the near-death experience? Because there are some, I feel like near-death experiences are as unique as people are unique.
Yeah.
And some people go through a tunnel, others don't have that experience. Some people see passed away loved ones on the other side. Some go to a heavenly realm and see grass and flowers and trees with colors and crystalline buildings. Others go to a void where it feels like everything and nothing all at once. Some have life reviews, some don't. Is
Hmm.
there a particular aspect of the NDE that you're particularly interested or intrigued by?
Um, I guess the life review would be one of the most intriguing aspects. And as you said, there are like I think there are like seven elements that are very common, and you named several of them. And some people have a mixture of them. I think most people don't have all of them. So that's intriguing also. And it's actually there's even a scale as to like how deep a near-death experience is. So it may be that people just didn't go deep enough. But as again, as someone who was raised in fundamentalist tradition, who was told we're going to die and there's going to be a judgment, it's really interesting the life review. And the life review again is one of those things where almost universally people say it was pleasant. It wasn't bad at all. I could think of one example where a person said it wasn't really a pleasant experience. But most people say I did not feel judged. I was kind of like looking at it myself. Sometimes it's kind of unpleasant because you get to feel what the other person, what they felt. There's a guy I remember, I can't recall his name, but he punched somebody in the face and beat him up.
Jeremiah Pospisil.
Okay, yeah. And so it's like, well, what's interesting to me about the life experience also is I found that you can start pre-doing your life experience or your life review now. So we can start to repent, if you want to use that word, going back to my background, or, being sorry, making amends, whatever you want to call it. We can start doing those things now so we don't have to go through them later. So I know people they make it a practice every night when they go to bed. They're like, what did I do well? What could I have done better? And you can start doing those things here. But the thing is, there is no, you're going left, you're going right. There's no separation of the sheep and the goats. There's no heaven or hell, which is, some people are very upset about because they want the bad people to go to hell. And I have to tell them, like, if it's good news for some of us, it's good news for all of us. So yeah, even that person you don't like, they're going to be there too.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And I do think that it has definitely been a trigger on this channel when somebody says that hell doesn't exist or sin isn't what I thought it was, or that judgment doesn't happen, because we do think that there are people that we want to judge and we want to see them suffer. But you mentioned Jeremiah's life review. And I want to just touch on that for a moment because, like you, I was absolutely have been obsessed with the life review process. I think it has the biggest ability to change the way that people live their lives when they understand that they're not doing this in oblivion, that they're going to have to look at it themselves and be their own judge and feel whatever they dished out, good or bad.
Hmm.
Jeremiah was one of the very first people I interviewed on my channel. I've had him on the
Hmm.
channel, I think, 3 or 4 times now. He's a super close friend. As a matter of fact, he texted me just a minute ago while you were talking about him, which I think is
Oh,
kind of
wow.
funny. Again, synchronicities, right? And his experience is so unique because it was the first time that I had ever heard that you felt what you had dished out. And for him, he had been living in this really negative area in a time when LA did not feel safe.
Hmm.
And he felt like he had to kind of make himself feel like he was immune from that. And he targeted some random kid at the school ground after school and just beat him up. And in his life review, he felt himself on top of the kid, pulling punches, feeling the adrenaline and all of those emotions coursing through his body. And then he becomes the kid and he is receiving every punch, feeling bewilderment because the
Mm,
kid didn't know why he was picked. But I think the most kind of impactful part of that life review experience was that he saw that each person had a soul contract. And because of his action at 12 years old or 15 years old, whatever he was, 14, beating up this other kid, he saw that this kid was going to have a personality change and become more introverted. And as a result, was not going to achieve some of the things in that
mm,
soul contract that he came here to achieve. And then he saw the parents and the impact that this had on the parents, where the parents became so much more concerned about their son that they sheltered and kind of helicopter parented, causing that son to become even more and more introverted. And as a result, now the parents and the son were not going to achieve some of the things they came here to achieve. And
wow.
he came back completely and utterly changed. When you understand that what you do to somebody doesn't have a small ripple, it can have a massive ripple. You realize I don't want to be that person. And I think it
Yeah.
changes how you interact. Maybe not in your car, because I think we still probably swear at people when they cut us off, but
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so, it's interesting because when we say things like there's no hell, then people get very upset because they say, well, you're saying there's no judgment or there's no consequences. And that's not what we're saying at all. When, as you said, once you start to see those ripple effects and understand that good and bad, can have massive impact on people. There's also another side that says if you smile at someone when you're walking down the street, you don't know how that's going to impact their life. So we do have more impact than we think we do, actually on both sides. So we're all very, very powerful beings that have a role to play on this planet.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the smile part because I think a lot of times we focus on the negative aspects of the life review, but all the positive ones count too. And I remember speaking to somebody a long time ago, I wish I could remember who it was, who said that when they smiled at somebody, they could see in the future that that person was suffering from severe depression and had been contemplating suicide. And at least
Hmm.
by that smile, making that person feel seen,
Hmm.
they didn't go and do it that day.
Yes, I've heard several stories like that. It's really funny because there's actually an ad on TV that shows this kind of pay it forward aspect. It's a silly ad, but it's people walking the street and somebody smiles, and the next person opens the door for another person, and the next person helps someone who drops something on the ground, and we can change someone's mood with very very small things. They may go home and be nicer to their spouse that day, and yes, sometimes we can prevent people from taking their own lives at that time.
Beautiful. So since you lost Shaina and you dove into the NDEs, were there some NDEs that helped you connect to feeling better and knowing without a shadow of a doubt that she was on the other side doing something?
Um, Again, I think of something in particular. It's just I guess the whole thing put together, the whole body of like there's a question of will we see our loved ones again? It's funny because even people who believe that we are spirit beings, that we are energy, there's an analogy that says that we're like drops in the ocean, which means that therefore when we go back into the ocean, when our bodies pass away, that we all become the one, the big soup, as my friend Kelvin Chen calls it. And even some NDEers will say they'll use language like I merged into the one. So, the ones that say, I saw my grandfather, I saw my grandmother, I saw people that were part of my lineage that I didn't even remember seeing before, that gives me hope of seeing my daughter again. Knowing that we don't die and knowing, but if I thought I'm going to just merge into the one, frankly, that doesn't sound very satisfying to me. I want to know that I'm going to retain my personality and that I'm going to be able to, have some remembrance of what this is about, because otherwise it's kind of like, it's all for naught. So the ones that were like Penny saw like her family. I mentioned Penny before, and other people that have said, "Yeah, I saw my family." People that have said, I got to, do things I wanted to do, things I love to do. Because like I've always wanted to play guitar and I've never had the time to do it. So I'm like, when I cross over, I'm going to take the time. I'm going to learn to play guitar. I love to play golf, but I don't have time to play golf right now. So I'm looking forward to doing this thing, at least for a while.
I think that's great. Well, I'm going to mention somebody that really touched me who had an experience of seeing loved ones on the other side. And it was a woman I interviewed named Karen Thomas. She had an NDE. And when she was 12 years old, her father died of a heart attack in a fishing boat in front of her. And later, as she became an adult, she became more and more religious. And she became a born again Christian with the belief that only those saved souls would be on the other side.
Hmm.
So she had lost her dad, was convinced he was not going to be in heaven. And then I think her brother died of a motor on a motorcycle. And so she was convinced he wasn't going to be in heaven. And she got to the other side and she was following a guide and they came to a stream, a very, very wide stream. And across the stream, she saw some people that she didn't recognize, but she knew. And she knew or understood them to be grandparents that she had not met in the physical. And then she saw her brother and her dad, and she was utterly gobsmacked because she wasn't
Yeah.
expecting them to be there because in her belief system, they had to go to hell, right?
Yeah.
And it changed everything about how she believed things when she came back. And that was so impactful. I think that there are a lot of people with beliefs like that who then fear and say, well, geez, I don't even want to die because these people that I loved and care about aren't going to be there. And I love that people have had the experiences where they can come back and share that for them, they saw somebody that they didn't expect to see in heaven.
Yeah, that belief that some people go this way and some people go that way is a very, very damaging one. And I
I
remember my
agree.
uncle was murdered when I was in my late 20s. I was in my late 20s and he was like in his early 40s. But because my uncle was gay, the church that I grew up in was like, you're not part of the church, you can't be it. And that, we talked about turning points earlier. That was one of the turning points for me also. I already had this fear and everything. But I remember my family saying something like, "It's too bad that he's going to be in hell or he's not." And I was like, "Okay, that's ridiculous."
I agree. That's
That was that
exactly
was
what I was thinking in my mind. What a ridiculous thought that
that
is.
is just it is so ridiculous. And I know Karen's story. And so it's good to have that for those people who are unfortunately still stuck in that fundamentalist belief, to have someone that can go there and bring back what I consider concrete evidence. It's like, this is not true. And I try to help people also, let's think through this logically, right? Does this make any sense? If God is supposedly love and God's all loving and all caring, and God loves you more than you love your child or anybody else in your life, would God really do that? I mean, why would you believe that unless some person standing in the pulpit told you that?
Right. Well, and I think the other part about it is that it's written in the Bible, which I have a really hard time with now. There's so much evidential information that's coming out that people are finally studying these texts that have been around for millennia, for thousands of years, but the normal average person hasn't had any access to them. And now
Right.
not only do we have access to it, but we're able to use AI to run through and interpret these translated versions and also find out the history of, oh, King James changed all of these things.
Yeah.
Oh, this society wanted to control in this way and added this or deleted this, and they're finding all these ancient texts that were excluded and just parts that were put together that make no sense. I don't think the New Testament and the Old Testament make any sense to be in the same book with each other. How do we have this wrathful, vengeful God? And when I was in the church, that's pretty much why I left. That didn't make sense to me anymore, that God could be love and then have all these human characteristics when unconditional love is something we haven't been able to achieve in a human form. So, but God would not be unconditional. It
Yeah.
didn't make any sense.
I went through, as I was making my transition out of Christianity, I discovered something called Christian Universalism. And it's a different way of reading the biblical text. And if you read the text that way, there is no eternal damnation. And then I found out also for the first 500 years of the early church, they believed in universalism. The church founders believed that Jesus' atonement was for everyone. It was
Yes.
only when the Romans got a hold of it and twisted it around, they said, well, we need for people to have one life, so we need to get reincarnation, and we need to have a binary system, and either go to heaven or hell, and they either listen to us or they go to hell. That was all done by man, and that's not even the way the Bible reads if you read it properly.
I love that you're sharing that. You know, it's interesting. I've been fascinated with reincarnation for a really long time. I would say probably 15 years ago, I got my hands on a book called Old Souls. And I interviewed the author of that book, and he had studied with a man who had devoted his entire life to going across all of the earth to find these children who had had these reincarnation and
Mm-hmm.
remembered their past lives. So this kind of ties in a little bit to everything that we're talking about. But what do you think about the whole thing with the past lives? Because the people that are religious, even now on my channel, have had not much uptake in watching any videos related to reincarnation. Still seems very taboo in the West.
Yeah, well, there's this belief among a lot of Christians that the Bible teaches that reincarnation is not real. And without going into a whole lot of detail, there are three or four like very clear passages where they forgot to take it out that the Bible does show that there's reincarnation. But the thing is that I think reincarnation is complicated, and it ties into like what's linear time, what does it mean to be you. My belief now, in a nutshell, is that we do reincarnate in a sense, but there's like an oversoul. There's a bigger part of me that kind of spins off different parts. That like one part became Brian, so I, as Brian, obviously will only live once, having the parents that I have, speaking the language I do, being in this body, going through these experiences. But when I do pass, I will become part of that collective again, and I will share experiences with these other lives that are very, very tightly tied to mine. And then people that again, tell it, their death experiences will tell us there is no linear time. These things you call past lives are all happening at the same time. And so they're actually kind of bleeding across. So it could be a very complex thing. But it's not, again, people read certain passages of the Bible. It's appointed to man to die once, and then there's the judgment. Therefore, there is no reincarnation. But the disciples asked Jesus, there was a man that was born blind. They said, why was a man born blind? Was it because he sinned or his parents sinned? And it's like, well, why would you ask if he sinned if there was no reincarnation?
Oh, interesting. I love that. And just for anybody who's curious about it, I'll put a link up here. But the interview I did was with Tom Shroder, who actually studied with Dr. Ian Stevens, who studied the reincarnation and past lives
Yeah.
of children. I think personally that there's a mountain of evidential evidence. I just think it's a moot point. I don't think that it's like when I had to do a hypothesis paper in the 8th grade about tectonic plates, and I had to hypothesize whether that was a real thing or not. Like there was already, when I went to do the paper, there was so much evidential information. Like, why am I even writing a paper? Like, who would even believe that didn't exist? I feel the same way now about reincarnation, really.
I completely agree. And if you think about it, most of the people for most of the history of the world have believed in some form of reincarnation. It's only been a very small minority of people who are typically fundamentalists who say it's because my book says it doesn't happen, that it doesn't happen. But if you look at it logically, if you look at it from experience, Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia, what they've done with those kids, most people that have had NDEs say very clearly that reincarnation exists, whatever they believed before.
Yeah, a lot of them have even seen lives that they have been not just on Earth, but as other entities, other
Yeah.
places that we could have experiences that were not human.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's a
So,
massive amount of evidence for it.
yes, I agree. So we got connected because of Mark Pitstick, who I
Hmm.
interviewed. I found Mark to be a wealth of information. That
Yeah.
man was rattling off all of these different things that he had created to help people get answers to questions that plagued them. But one of the things that we talked about, but not very long, was about the soul phone. Am I
Mhm.
saying it right? The soul
SoulPhone.
phone?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to link the interview I did with Mark up here because I highly recommend it. I loved my conversation with him and I feel grateful that I got connected to you through him. But
Yeah.
I think that this is a nice evolution from people who have used the pendulum to
Yeah.
ask yes and no questions where they would get either a back and forth or a circular response and answer to yes or no questions.
Yeah.
How far out do you think we are with everything that we're doing in October of 2025, where technology has very quickly started to accelerate with AI?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And as someone, my background's in engineering. Technically speaking, I don't see limitations to it. I mean, and there's all these what I see as parallel tracks now. I mean, like I said, cellular analogy is doing work. Some people think that AI is going to be able to connect to the divine. I'm skeptical about that. I've seen the device that Gary is working on with the SoulPhone. That's coming along. Um, and there's the question to me like spirit, that kind of is guiding us and stuff. How far is that going to, will we be allowed to go? I guess and what would their implications be? There was a movie a few years ago. I can't remember what it was called now, where someone developed a device to communicate with the afterlife, and then there was a Hollywood thing, and we got really excited on the Soul Phone project because we're like, this is great. It's going to expose people to the possibility, and the movie went down just like a really dark rabbit hole. People started committing suicide. It was just a disaster. So, there are ethical considerations. There are a lot of religious fanatics that would be really pushing back against, something like that. So the bottom line is I don't know how far out that's going to be. And you have to kind of play out the implications on both sides. Would it help people to live better lives and to realize that there is more? Or, will we have these religious fanatics that are freaking out and would people say, well, now that I know there's another side, I don't need to worry about this. I just check myself out. So there's concern with that a little bit.
Yeah, we don't want to go down the checking ourselves out. I think I've heard enough from NDEers that have been shown or told that if you do that, you're just going to have to come back and do it all over again. Like, how far did you get? If you got to 30 or 40 or 50, do you really want to set back to zero and start all over again? I
Yeah,
think I'm just
yeah,
going to keep going.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't. We'll see where it goes. It's frankly, I thought a few years ago we worked on it would be more farther along than it is now, but there have been it's there are technical issues also. And like I said, getting it small enough, getting it fast enough, getting it reliable enough. So, um, but Gary, he's a brilliant guy, and we liken it to
Gary
like the Wright
Schwartz.
brothers.
Hmm.
Yeah, the Wright brothers. The first flight was like 12 seconds, and now we fly across the ocean. We don't
It's
even think
true.
about it. So we're past the 12-second mark, but we're more like we're making hops, but we're not doing international travel yet.
Well, maybe one of these times and people can look forward to that and follow that journey.
Yeah.
So, Brian, you're involved in a lot of things. You've got your podcast, which you still actively do, correct?
Oh yeah. Hmm.
And then you've got all of these different boards that you're a part of. I think that right now is such an exciting time to be on earth. I believe that my soul chose to come here at this time to help people to wake up, to remember the power of their soul, to remember that we are loved, to remember that we are one, to remember that we are connected to every person. Tell me what you're excited about what you think is coming in the future.
Well, I interview a lot of people who have had near-death experiences, and a lot of them say that they say this is a very exciting time. This is a time we're about to step into the fourth dimension or the fifth dimension, and different people have different ideas of what that actually means. I'm a very skeptical guy. I'm a very pragmatic guy. I grew up in the church that said Jesus is coming back at any minute. I believe that for most of my life. So I'm a little skeptical of like major big changes, happening overnight. But what I'm really hopeful for is as I've studied history for the most of the history of the planet, people believed in an afterlife, even scientists. There was a division between science and religion a couple hundred years ago where science said, we're going to study the stuff that I can pick up and hold, and you study consciousness and all the other stuff. We're going to ignore all that. And then people said, well, then that must mean there is no spirit world. So that's where I believe man is right now. We're lost. What I want to see is a return to where we were. It's not even that big of a thing. It's just going back like 200 years. Let's embrace all the technology. I love the technology. I love the fact that I can talk to you over the internet.
Me
I love
too.
all this stuff. I'm a huge technological person, but I'm excited to see people remember who they are and
Mm.
understand that we are all connected and that what we do impacts each other. And like that guy you talked about beating up the other kid, that when we hurt someone else, that we're hurting ourselves, and that when we look around the planet and we don't care about other people because they're on the other side of a line, that line is an imaginary line, and understand that we are here to learn and we are here to grow. So I'm excited to see people waking up to who they are. Really, just so whether the technology comes along and we get things like the SoulPhone or not, or whether a lot of people saying aliens are going to step in, and that could happen. But
Tell me
really,
what you think about that.
about aliens,
Yeah.
again, I'm very skeptical. I'm not. I listen to it, and I listen to it when I was going to the IANDS meetings here locally. They always want to talk about aliens, and I'm like, I don't understand the connection between aliens and near-death experiences. Um, Again, I'm not putting any of that stuff down. I'm more earth-based, and I'm more practical, and I'm more like, okay, but this is what we can do now. We can study near-death experiences. We can start believing mediums. We can start listening to things like the telepathy tapes.
Oh,
We've
my
got all
favorite.
this evidence out there right now. And I have a really good friend who was a hardcore materialist, and we met each other on Facebook, and she came to me. She goes, "I don't believe mediumship is real. Send me your best medium. I'm going to just prove this once and for all." So I said, "Okay," and I sent her to my friend who's a medium. She gave a fake credit card. She gave a fake name. She came back. She goes, she just blew me away. She's like, "I'm a believer," and they've actually become best friends now. And then she said, "Well, what else evidence? What other evidence?" Yeah. So I started giving her books by like Penny Sartori and Julie Beischel and Gary Schwartz, et cetera. And she came back. She goes, all this evidence is out there. Why don't people know about it? So I just want people to take advantage of what's there. Podcasts like yours, just listen to the telepathy tapes.
Mm.
I'm so glad that was like the number one podcast earlier this year.
I
So
love
people
that
waking
so
up to that.
much.
Yeah,
I got to meet Diane Hennessy
yeah,
at the IANDS conference in Chicago a couple of months ago. She said she'd come on the show and talk to me, and I'd really love to have a conversation with her. I have called the telepathy tapes the 4 minute mile of consciousness.
yeah, yeah,
Because once we understand that it's possible, more and more people will begin to do it. And I think that there will be a point in our evolution. I don't know how far away it is. Maybe probably not when my kids have kids, but maybe when my grandchildren have kids, that they will be born and they will begin right out of right as soon as they're born talking or communicating telepathically
yeah.
because it'll just be a normal thing.
I do believe that there are what they call soul kid or soul star seeds. I think they're calling some of these
Star
kids,
seeds,
or
yeah.
crystal children and stuff. There's different name for them,
Indigo kids,
but
yeah.
they're saying that people are coming in more advanced because the world needs it. And I've seen it with a lot of kids that are coming in now. So I definitely believe that we may be ready for an upgrade. I'm just not going to wait around for it, and I won't be around for it. So,
I don't know, with AI, you might be.
yeah, no, no, no. That's not the plan for me. For somebody else, maybe. But I'm looking forward to seeing my daughter again.
I
So
bet.
yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that this is a pivotal point. And the other thing is, a lot of people are just very, very upset right now. There are a lot of people in grief because of what's going on around our planet, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. And I want people to understand, what I do believe also a lot of near-death experiences tell, these are like birth pangs, and Jesus talked about birth pangs. So a lot of times, right before there's a revolution, things get really dark, and I'm hoping maybe we're on the precipice of that, where people realize the way things are going right now are not working. I've interviewed Rafael Garcia on my podcast a couple of times, and he's had near death experiences, and he's had these visions, and he's like, the truth is about to be revealed, and people are going to realize that the systems that we bought into are not working. And if you look around, there's an abundance of everything on earth. It's just not distributed very well. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking that maybe we're ready to wake up from that.
I hope so. Well, Brian, I would imagine that people who are watching want to connect with you and they want to find your podcast. So share where people can find you.
Yeah, you can find me at grieftogrowth.com. So it's grief, the numeral 2 growth.com. My podcast is Grief to Growth, and I'm on Substack at grieftogrowth.substack.com.
Beautiful. Well, Brian, I have so loved this conversation. I feel so grateful to be able to talk to people like you, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all of these boards that you've been serving on, for all of this work. I know doing this myself with creating content, there's so much that goes into it. People just don't even understand the work and the dedication. So thank you, Brian, for what you are doing to wake up the collective consciousness. It is so needed right now.
Well, thank you. It's been great meeting you, and it's always nice to meet someone that's doing this work also. I think this is what we're here for.
Absolutely. And of course, this show is nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, listen, and share these amazing conversations. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Do you believe that love never dies and you want to hear stories that prove it? Well, hit the subscribe button. You belong here.